Well, please join me in welcoming two of my favorite musicians to play with, Tim Lefebvre on bass and Wayne Krantz on guitar. We've been playing together a little over 10 years now, and back in the day we played in this little club in New York City called the 55 Bar every Thursday, and it really became a band, and has done wonders for my playing and development as a player, and especially on the improvisational side of things and trying to be creative on the drums and finding new things to play. And we actually did 2 records from those days that Wayne put out under his name, Greenwich Mean and Your Basic Live from the 55 Bar. And we actually just finished a studio record entitled Krantz, Carlock, Lefebvre that is soon to be released. We're just going to play for you and discuss how we approach the music, and just please think of some questions you want to ask, and just keep it loose. And so we'll just start by playing Old New. Thanks. That was entitled Old New. What we do in this trio is we play the written parts that Wayne writes, and once that's been done, and there's many different forms of those written parts. Every tune has a different way of approaching those. But once those are done, we go into what we call blowing sections. And when we're in those blowing sections, we are thinking in 8-bar phrases always. So we're all improvising together within those 8-bar phrases, and we have a lot of things that happen. Not only are we staying connected, you know, musically and creatively, we're using those forms of 8 bars to cue different directions in the music. It can go different places. In this tune, we just did a tempo cue that went down in tempo, and then it was cued back up. And we have several of those. We have one that's called up and way up, and we have a down and a way down. And it means basically what it sounds like. And the way that happened is Wayne looked at us and said down, and we're in the midst of that 8-bar phrase. We have to keep, you know, we have to know where we are within that phrase. At the end of that particular phrase is when that cue will happen, at the very top of the next phrase on 1. So that's what happened. We just went down. It's not a metric modulation or anything mathematical. It's just something we just agree on right away. And we've done it enough to where it just kind of happens, you know, okay. You know, so we could actually demonstrate that. And I think you were cueing some key changes as well. That's right. Within the phrase. Obviously that's for Tim. Sometimes I might want to go with that or not. I might just stay where I am, but if I hear that maybe if I change with them, it might be cool, maybe not. You know, a lot of times I'll just stay where I am and let that happen. I guess we could demonstrate some of the tempo cues to show how that works, and then there's many others that we could touch on as well that'll happen in the tunes that we're going to play, and we'll discuss them when we come to them. We'll play just some 8-bar phrases of improvising, and you'll cue down or way down, up, way up. See how it goes. Cool? So like 1, 2,
G.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah, we should mention that Keith controls the changes in tempo in terms of what they actually are. I was cueing them. I mean, I'm kind of directing the thing during the phrases to be enacted at the beginning of the next phrase, like Keith was explaining. But it's basically, since it's not a metric modulation, at least not in a mathematical way. We don't know whether it's a subdivision of a triplet or anything like that. I mean, maybe sometimes it is accidentally, but we're not thinking about it like that. It's just a tempo change. And we want it to be as kind of drastic and unexplained and almost in a way irrational. I mean, hopefully it's rational musically, but just mathematically irrational. That's the effect that we want. So it's Keith's responsibility to just write on the one, because we decided a long time ago that was the most efficient way to do this, rather than trying to figure out how to lead up with a fill in that new time or something, to actually make the shift right on one. And then it's up to Tim and me to get on board with that tempo as fast as possible. And we've gotten better at it over the years because we kind of know, we sort of feel what down means for Keith. It's down and way up from whatever tempo we're at. So that's a relative thing too. It's like whatever speed we're at, down means a different tempo than it would if we were playing at a slower tempo when we went down. So it's always relative to the tempo we're in.
What happens if you want to play the head at the same tempo you started it, but you went down, way down, up, way up?
That's a great question. I mean, if the head is the kind of head that has to be played at a specific tempo, they aren't all like that. Some of them can be played at wildly different tempos and they work. But if it's a head that has to be played at a specific tempo, then we know to always return to that tempo for the head, no matter what changes we're making in the blowing. When I cue the head out, we go back to head tempo at that point. And if that fluctuates slightly, it usually doesn't matter that much.
Yeah, it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be exactly. But in the same zone. Mm-hmm. You know. And I should say that this idea of the tempo changes came from a record of Wayne's called Greenwich Mean, and where he edited some different sections together where this happened, these shifts of tempo. And then we just tried to learn how to emulate that. And this is how we came up doing that. Came up with the idea of, within the phrase, he cues the tempo change,
Is there a way you cue a feel change, maybe, like to a shuffle or something like that, or is that your own choice?
I think it's more we kind of listen to each other, and it's all of us choosing what to do. I think if things get really slow, it can kind of go into different feels, So
you don't really change the feel right on the one.
Sometimes.
Or you slip into it, or
no, yeah. Sometimes we do.
Is that something that Wayne? Is that something that you cue?
No.
That's just
I never do that.
That's really cool.
I've never done that.
I think even on the, if I'm not mistaken, the way we just played the last tune, when we went down, we kind of went into kind of a hip hop kind of.
Sometimes it's not intentional
kind of
though.
Swung,
Yeah.
And then when we went back to the head, we went back to the straight, 16th note kind of vibe. So it's just listening to each other and connecting with it.
Sometimes it's based on, like if I'm guessing what area he's in, I always drop a 1 in, but sometimes I don't know where the next 16th note is, so I place it late, so then it turns into and he starts playing kind of hip-hoppy, and it's cool, it's always kind of totally in the moment, so.
I was gonna ask, do y'all sometimes play almost like a longer note on beat 1 just until he plays beat 2, or do you just kind of dive in?
Not consciously, no. I mean, on the thing we just did when we were running through those different tempos, except for one of them, which I kind of misjudged, I was just guessing, and guessing about where it was going to be, and I guessed right on, I think on all of them except one. So I was just right away, I was filling in with the next 8th note or the next 16th note. But it doesn't always work like that. But I mean, if it happens pretty quick, we're talking, it's never going to happen, it's never going to take longer than a beat. So if a beat is kind of loose,
But when it's nailed, it's such a great effect.
Yeah.
It's fun for us because it breaks things up where we can kind of start over and let something else happen, let something else develop. So it's cool for us in that respect, and then for the audience, it's just such an unexpected thing to happen.
Well, you're you're calling out the cue basically, but Keith, you're pretty much establishing what those next 8 bars are going to be, right?
Yeah, I guess you could say it that way.
Somewhat kind of like that.
That's right.
I just have to be.
And then you guys just within half a second are on board with what Keith is basically calling out.
That's
what he's changing to.
Yeah.
And the tempo has to, whatever we shift into, the tempo has to be locked down, really from the first beat.
Yeah.
It can't go anywhere within itself.
Yeah?
What are some good tips you guys have for improvising in this type of setting? Like things to be aware of?
The way that I see it, in one way, just to describe it, you know, there's a lot of guitar trios in the world, and a lot of what we're trying to do, and a lot of this vision comes from Wayne, and we've picked up on it and contributed to it. But I think what we're trying to do is avoid things that have been done a lot, like the bass and drums playing more repetitive patterns all the time for him to solo over, for Wayne to solo over, and the guitar. Although that does happen in the music when we play, we do get into repetitive stuff. But we also can basically improvise together, and there's different ways that we can do that. When we improvise together, sometimes it can be like a dialogue, like we're talking, you know, talking to each other and reacting. Wayne has an incredible rhythmic way of playing guitar and his phrasing, as does Tim, and I think we just all connect with that and find places to you know, answer what was just played, or play along with it, you know, as you're just kind of reacting to what is happening. And then there's the other type of improvisation of where we might be a lot more repetitive. We'll get into something that sounds really cool. It even can sound like it's composed, but it just happened on the spot. So we'll stay there. And I think that reminds me, one of the cues we have is called freeze. We're into something that, you know, is really repetitive, and Wayne will look at us and say, freeze, remember what this is, because we're going to come back to it later within this tune. So we'll go off into something else, maybe a completely different tempo or vibe, and then he'll say, go back. Is that the one? Go back? And then we'll go right back to what that freeze was. You know, so so then to the listener and to us, we're creating something that you can latch on to, and you know, just really different things for a trio to do that I think is really unique. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just thinking, in answer to the you know, tips about improvising. I mean, something that makes it possible to do all the stuff that we're doing and talking about today is the fact that we all have an agreed upon 16th note. Like, we're connected on the grid. So, and we're also, that's the kind of vertical connection that we have. But then we've got this horizontal connection on the phrase, which is like 4s, 8s, and 16s within that grid, or over on the top of that grid, let's say. So we've got it kind of up and down and horizontally, this rhythmic connection, which makes sense of a lot of, it allows us to experiment a lot, but still sound like we're kind of together. If that wasn't happening, if there were a lot more flams and stuff, if we weren't in total agreement with the quarter note, let's call it, it would be much harder to really try to go off the beaten track, because it would sound terrible very fast, you know. It would really sound like we don't know what we're doing. We're trying, I mean, half the time we really kind of don't know what we're doing, in the sense that we're not exactly sure where everything's going to go. But we can kind of give the impression that we know what we're doing, because we're all in more or less in rhythmic agreement.
And we're hearing those 8-bar phrases.
That's major.
You know, that's what makes it all work.
Yeah, I mean, that's what allows the conscious direction of the improvising to occur, is the phrases. Because we know that if there's a cue, we know when that cue is going to happen. Exactly, we know when it's going to happen. And I don't have to go like, 1, 2, 3, you know. It makes it much more efficient.
So that reminds me of another cue, which is a composed cue, where we were doing some tempo changes within that tune, and Wayne was cueing to this composed cue that was a riff, the don na 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 na, that thing, and the thing about that one is that it always goes back to that tempo, to the original tempo, no matter where we are. So in that tune, the form, it has 4 parts. So the form is laid out in numbers. We have 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the way we play it, and the way we usually play it is 1 is just an open key, right? 2 is a composed part. The da 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 da. That's 2. And then we'll go back to 1 again, and then reprise the number 2 again. Then, you know, we're open again, and then the next cue is 3, which is the composed cue. And then once we're in the blowing after that, each time he cues 3, we're going back to that tempo. So that's kind of how it's laid out. And then 4 is the outro thing that we played. So that's another example of a cue. And did we do anything else in that I'm forgetting?
Not really.
We stopped, you and I.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Forgot about that.
Yeah,
You can edit that little part out, right?
We have a cue called a cut.
Concern you.
And a cut is basically, well, it is, at the end of whatever phrase we're in, the 8th bar, we're going to break on the end of 4. Tim and I, we do it as a band a lot of the times. Wayne will say cut, and we'll just stop on the end of 4, and then he'll maybe count in some other composed part or another tempo altogether just to go somewhere else. But Tim and I did it while Wayne was playing, so Tim and I looked at each other. We don't even have to say cut anymore. We know what we're going to do. So within that phrase, we stopped on the end of 4. And then we brought it back in at a weird place in the phrase, so that started the next phrase.
And we laugh about it because every time they do that, they choose a place where I'm falling apart. Every single time. It never fails. It's when I'm just stretched beyond performance, you know.
So we came back in, it basically made it an odd phrase, and those odd phrases hardly ever happen unless it's in a written section or something. But so we came in a bar later, so it made it whatever, a 5-bar phrase maybe, or
It's a nice way to shift gears.
yeah. Yeah.
So Keith, could you talk a little bit about what happens if one of you loses the form? Do you guys just start it again or pick it up?
I think back in the day, I used to just hit a big 1 and hope that I was right, and they would just latch on. I might get an evil eye every now and then. But I think now that we've played enough together, you know, if one of us loses it, you know, I'll look at Tim and I'll say, "Where's 1?" Or, yeah.
I've never seen that.
Well, I hide it. Yeah. But I mean, it does happen occasionally, and you know, it's just basically where is it, and whether it's right or not, I'll just hit 1, and we'll just start from there. You know.
It happens to me a lot. It happens to me probably maybe 3 times in a night, and I just look at Keith and I say 1, and whatever he's playing at the beginning of his next phrase, he plays 1, and it doesn't matter who was right or who was wrong or if that's correct. All that matters is that we get on board together as fast as possible, because we've talked about this. It's like if we're not together on the phrase, the rhythms that we're playing are kind of meaningless at that point. They're just kind of incidental or accidental. So we want to be in agreement as soon as possible, and that's the main goal. And it's just the most efficient way is to have the drums control that, whether they're right or wrong.
What happens if, like, your eyes are closed and you miss a cue or something? Is it just, do you re-cue again, or
Yeah.
just wait for the next round?
Well, it's the next phrase,
Next
or
phrase
maybe
you'll
it's not appropriate anymore to make that cue, because sometimes they're really right for the moment, but once that's gone, they're not right anymore. So.
It's more important that those two kind of hook up on the cues, because I missed a few. Even today, I've missed a few, and you just catch up, you know.
Well, bass never matters anyway, so.
That's true.
In this band, actually, that's not true.
But what do you ever get a chance to cue?
I'll do it just by, if I hear that I want the tempo to go up or down, I might just throw it in, and then they'll follow me. I've done that occasionally. I've done it but usually Wayne's in charge of the cues. He's like the James Brown of the band.
It's kind of a visual issue, actually, because if we were all on the same, if it was a democracy as far as the cues, we'd all have to constantly be looking at each other, and that's not practical.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's easier if I just throw it over my shoulder. They know when to look for them because it's always going to be halfway through a phrase or something.
Is that where you normally cue, on the fourth measure?
No, it's just during the phrase, and it's usually kind of somewhere in the middle of the phrase, maybe. So they know that's kind of a heads up, and if they don't happen to be looking at me, I just wait, as I said before, for the next.
Yeah.
Wayne, you and Tim are both very rhythmic players, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you like a drummer to complement like a rhythmic motive that y'all play.
It sort of depends on like what we're up for at the moment. It's sort of sometimes we just kind of play off each other. Like Keith's a great listener, so like kind of anything we bounce off each other kind of comes back in a different way. Or maybe he's just playing 2 and 4. I mean, who knows? I mean, it's. I mean, I keep saying this to everybody who ever asks me. It's like there's kind of like when I play with Keith, there's just everything I've seen to play sounds good with him. It's just he's just that kind of drummer. So it's sort of it all kind of works. So it doesn't happen all the time. It doesn't happen with every drummer you play with. But I feel that with him. So it's sort of it makes you can pretty much do anything you want actually in answer to the question.
Yeah, there's kind of a sort of a magical component that's not too specific, but also, I mean, the question kind of is how do you play with someone, which is really important. Do you imitate what they do? Do you try to play against what they're doing? Do you focus on the dynamic of it and respond to that? Do you play groove if they're not playing groove, or do you play freer if they're playing groove? And like those are 4 options about how to respond to somebody musically out of countless options. I mean, it's an infinite, it's whatever your imagination allows. We split the difference between those and whatever else is operating all the time. Like it seems to me like when you're first learning how to play with a drummer, there's this issue of, hey, I'm playing in 5, you play in 5 too, because that'll show that we're listening to each other. And that can get kind of corny pretty fast. Sometimes it's appropriate for Keith to actually double something that we're playing. A lot of times I think of it as Keith is basically just creating a context, this is kind of what Tim was saying, a context rhythmically for that idea to sit in comfortably. And that's a living thing. That's something that he's constantly reevaluating as the thing unfolds. And a lot of times the dialogue stuff that Keith was talking about that is part of the improvising that we do, it's not like we're just playing a pattern and that pattern repeats forever and then Keith thinks of different ways to play with it. It's constantly changing. The pattern is constantly evolving and turning into something else. So, Keith listens to that, processes it, and somehow accompanies that, in a way that to me is always really comfortable. I know that anything I can think of is, as Tim said, is basically going to be sitting, I mean, we're not perfect machines or anything. Sometimes it sounds terrible, and we have to change what we do. But I mean, we're always kind of fine-tuning it in the moment to see what is going to make this sound the best it can now. Is it me ignoring that and going back to groove? Is it me playing with it? Is it me like playing a contrast to it rhythmically? It's all these decisions that are possible are being made in real time, and that's what's so incredible about it, really, is there's so many things being decided at every moment. And it's kind of the magic of improvising, obviously not this band, but anyone improvising. And it is magic. I mean, I can't figure out how it's possible for anybody to think that fast, but he does, so.
Well, it helps that we, like I said earlier, we really have played so much together now, over 10 years, that a lot of things really are. We don't even have to verbalize it. We just can figure it out at this point. We really know each other's playing and instincts. It just kind of is more natural than it used to be anyway. I think that's the great thing about a band. It becomes deeper than just putting great players together. You know, it becomes more than that, you know, a unit. I mean, that reminds me when we play, I'm not sure what tune we're doing next. Riff? We could do this tune that really is, the head is a riff. I could demonstrate how I can just play groove, I can play around it, I can play verbatim what they're doing. I could even solo over it, you know, but, or I guess it could be kind of like a rhythmic counterpoint where I'm playing inside of what they're playing, you know, to thicken it up, which is sometimes how I think about when I play with a bass player, and especially in this band, you know, a lot of the times the kick drum is following the bass line in a lot of popular music and groove music, and that's really what's called for. But then there's also times where you can play inside of it, play around it, or not so repetitive, or you know, there's many choices you can make that will change the feel of the groove. And sometimes it is best to just play the bass line on the kick drum too. You want to just play the tune and then we'll talk about it afterwards? That might be best. We'll just play the tune and then I'll get back to all that. There were some examples of what I was talking about in there that time a little bit. You know, I think a lot of times we as drummers were thinking we got to play that riff on the bass drum, you know. So if I had, it would have really changed the whole feel of it, because that riff doesn't really play one. So I'm playing the one to lock it into some kind of groove. Otherwise, it would sound really not so groovy, in my opinion. So I'm making that choice, because it's 1, 2, 3. So to make it funky, I'm playing in between that. It's and I'm playing. We just play the riff once, 2, 3. You know, I guess I played a few choices I could make with that, but I think the best choice for the riff is to play the one, you know, because it needs that. And that's cool how grooves can happen that way. You know, just saying before how I don't have to play with the bass players playing all the time for it to work, you know.
I have a question. The last song, and just that last example you did, when you started to kind of go off, you're doing like a roll off the toms onto the snare drum. Looks like it's a paradiddle diddle. I mean, do you know what you're playing there?
I do.
I've seen you play it many times, so it's a lick you kind of go to.
Yeah, it's kind of my one lick I play too much sometimes.
Nah,
Most
not
of the time.
enough.
Could you demonstrate that?
Yeah, I guess I got the idea from hearing Elvin Jones do his rolling thing. That kind of, you really can't write it out most of the time. It's a very organic, just. It's a sound. It's something that he's doing that's really interesting. Other people have done it too, but I always associate it with Elvin in a way. But I just tried to take that idea and make something out of it that that could be a little more in the grid, you know, especially with this band. So I just think of it as a roll, as a sound, a double stroke roll, and then you can put the accent wherever you want. And I usually use right, left. You know, like an open flam on the toms or somewhere else. And with 2 beats on the bass drum before that accent. So the accent sounds like this. It could be really close together or really far apart, depending on how fast the roll is happening. And then in between that, I'm playing a roll like this. I guess that would be.
Paradiddle diddle diddle.
Is that what that is?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. You win. So, you know, there's other ways that you can phrase that to make it more interesting, and I've tried to start it like I'll start the accent on like the E of a beat. You know, so if I'm playing like, I'll just give some examples like. There's a lot of different ways you can do it, but that's just one example of.
Do you ever
know,
use like a different note value? Instead
Probably.
of like a 32nd or a 16th triplet, maybe like slow it down to just a regular triplet kind of phrasing?
Probably. I just don't think about it, but I'm sure if you broke it down,
Just
that's what.
however you hear it at that moment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes I'll just completely do it out of time, and just feel where I hope the pulse is, and I'll just as an effect.
Right, right, right.
You know. But that's
lick.
basically it.
Cool lick.
Yeah, it's a lot of things you can do with that. Yeah, so just to show just a few other examples, a lot of times when I play this rolling kind of flurry, I guess is what it sounds like in a way, it's in the moment, so it's not the easiest thing to do is just to come up and play an example, but what I'm going to do to help me is I'm just going to play some 8-bar phrases and throw in these things in different places at some different tempos. So within a groove, and try my best to keep it, you know, within that phrase. So. Another example, maybe a faster tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4. They're just going to play with me just to keep some time underneath. You guys are going to play more of a time thing, and then I'll roll over.
I'm going to try to keep it steady.
Okay. So I guess an example in 6. And we're just going to keep the 8-bar phrases happening, obviously. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you can obviously you can do a lot with that. Where it stops, where it starts, can be in really interesting places in the phrase. And just one last thing, one last one that I do a lot at the ends of phrases to end on a 1 if I want to use this as a cool effect to come to a 1. This last one though would be like, say if we're in 6. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, So it's essentially and that could be used in 4/4 as well, like 1, 2, 3. Of course, I'm not going to do that on a Steely Dan gig or you know, something that would be completely out of context. But at the ends of tunes, it's a nice way to, you know, to have a flurry of sounds or some kind of effect in a solo, you know, when it's appropriate, obviously. Yeah, so just so you can hear the phrase a little better, how I'm hearing it, I'll turn the click on and do a couple examples. This one's in 6. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And one more in 4. Again, I'm just thinking 8-bar phrases and throwing it in where I hear it at the time. 1, 2, 3. So that last one, I've heard where I could speed up the velocity of it to get to the 1. You know, I have no idea what I did, but it's just a feeling and just hearing where the pulse is. So, yeah.
This band has such an amazing sound together. How has playing in this environment affected your drums, the sound of them, if any?
Well, a lot, actually. Because I started in college experimenting with this tuning, you know, because I was studying jazz and learning how to play on more of an open bass drum. But I just took that, basically the same idea, but just tuned it down, you know, all the way around, so it's not so bebop sounding.
How is that open bass drum sound I guess, affected the creativity, because it's really, really unique. It's a great, great sound for this trio you have here. It's perfect. Is it something that you developed with the band, or was it you brought that into the scenario?
I developed it with the band. I was recording myself every Thursday that we played at the 55. I was recording the gigs and listening back and learning from it, learning, you know, where my weaknesses were and where I'd rush, where I'd drag, where I would, you know, I'm always thinking about that stuff, trying to be better at, just become a better player overall. But in those days, I was listening back to it, and I realized how boxy the bass drum was sounding, and it just wasn't really filling out the room like I guess I thought it was. And I just started experimenting with this, and when you're not mic'd in a small room or in a club setting, it really helps kind of give it that sensation that it's being mic'd, because it just fills out the room more low end. There's more air moving. So that's kind of how it started, and then it just became part of the band sound, you know, doing it for so long, and then just experimenting with it. And there's different sounds you can get out of the bass drum if you're playing it lighter versus, you know, really digging into it. With an open kick drum, though, I'm always coming off of it, because sometimes you'll get a flam effect if you don't, and it helps me to stay relaxed, because I'll play a note and then I come off the head, and my foot can relax until the next thing I play. I'm not just, you know, stuck, you know. Exactly. But yeah, it was just developed over time with this band, as a lot of things did.